The first breath I took was on a kitchen floor slick with my mother's blood. The last breath my husband took was in a hospice bed, alone. Between those two moments, a lifetime of being erased, then learning to write myself back into existence. My name is Maria Alvarez. My mother, Luciana, had hands like stone and a voice like sugar. She birthed 8 of us, but I was the third, the quiet one. The one who never cried too loud or asked for much. We were poor. Dirt poor. But our poverty was never just about money. It was silence. It was the weight of unspoken things. My father, a field worker who rarely came home sober, believed girls were meant to be invisible until they married. My mother? She believed girls were born to survive. I was 8 the first time I cooked a full meal. 13 when I helped deliver my sister's baby in the back room because the midwife was late. 16 when I married Tomas Rivas, a handsome, sharp-jawed boy from our village who promised me a better life in America. He kept that promise, for a while. We lived in our small Mexican village just long enough for me to start dreaming in color, imagining life in Los Angeles, the land of gold streets and endless sun. We took a bus to Tijuana, and then walked, yes, walked, across the border in the dead of night with a man Tomas called El Conejo. I didn't ask questions. I held my breath and prayed. Crossing that border was like dying and being reborn under foreign stars. My feet blistered from walking, and my stomach twisted with hunger, but when we arrived in East Los Angeles, I saw palm trees and cried. Not from joy, but because I knew everything familiar was gone. We lived in a one-room apartment behind a bakery where the roaches were braver than the landlords. Tomas worked odd construction jobs. I cleaned motel rooms for $5 an hour, paid in cash. Cleaning motel rooms for $5 per hour, I learned America runs on invisible hands. At night, I would rub my feet with Vicks VapoRub, lie beside Tomas, and whisper dreams into the dark. Then came the babies. Mateo, then Luna, then twins, Rafael and Rosa. Finally, Elena. 5 children in 10 years. I mothered like breathing, constant, quiet, essential. I stitched quilts from old jeans. Cooked beans until the pot cracked. I worked. Tomas changed. First, it was the long hours. Then the drinking. Then the rage. One night, when Rosa was 6, he didn't come home. 3 days later, I learned he had left with a woman named Carla, a girl from his job who had no children, no stretch marks, no calluses. I sat on the cold kitchen floor and cried silently, the same place I'd been born. I moved my children into a shelter. The room smelled of bleach and despair. I got a night shift washing dishes at a diner, then cleaned houses in the day. I took Mateo to school, carried the twins on my hips, and told Luna stories while braiding her hair. I learned to speak English watching cartoons with my kids. Once, I found Rosa crying after school. A teacher had called her dirty. I held her tight and whispered, "We are not dirty. We are roots. We are stone." When the children got older, they started to forget. Forget my accent embarrassed them. Forget how I used food stamps. Forget how my hands cracked from bleach. They became Americans, fluent in slang and shame. I was the woman they called extra. Too strict. Too emotional. Too foreign. Elena once shouted, "You're stuck in your sad little immigrant story, Mama." And maybe I was. I never went to prom. Never had sleepovers. Never got a college acceptance letter. But I knew how to survive. How to multiply rice. How to fix a fever with garlic. How to press my tears deep into my pillow so the children wouldn't hear me sob. By the time the last one left for college, I stood in an empty apartment and realized something terrifying: no one needed me anymore. I rented a room in an older woman's garage. Her name was Senora Rivera. We shared cafecito and telenovelas. I worked for her in exchange for cheap rent. For the first time in decades, I bought myself a dress. I walked to the park. I read poetry. I took a citizenship class. Passed the test. Cried in the arms of a stranger at the immigration office. I started Maria's Miracle Maids, a cleaning company with 3 women from the shelter. We sang as we scrubbed. We shared stories and vaporub and tamales. One day, I received a phone call. Tomas had died in San Diego. Alone. Cancer. The woman he left me for had disappeared years earlier. He left one thing: a life insurance policy. $210,000. I bought a duplex in Boyle Heights. The lemon trees I planted bloomed quickly. I didn't call the children. Mateo came first. I lost my job. Can I stay? Then Luna. Then Rafael. Rosa. Elena. One by one, the children returned, heavier, quieter, uncertain. They met a woman they didn't know. A woman who spoke fluent English. Who wore perfume. Who laughed loudly. I welcomed them. Cooked for them. Tucked their babies into beds. But I did not become invisible again. One Sunday, I called a meeting. We are family, I said. But this house is not free. Respect lives here. Contribution lives here. Love, yes. But not sacrifice without recognition. They looked shocked. Elena cried. Rosa apologized. Mateo called me a boss. I smiled. I had not raised fools. Only forgetful ones. Maria's Miracle Maids became a nonprofit. We trained immigrant women. Gave them childcare stipends. I was interviewed for the local news. A young woman, Yasmin, once asked me, "Why didn't you give up?" I looked her in the eyes. Because no one taught me how. I was invited to speak at a women's leadership summit. I wore red, my mother's favorite color. My grandchildren clapped in the audience. My children cried in the front row. When I spoke, I didn't say, "I survived." I said, "Look closely. The woman you called just a maid now holds the microphone. The hands you thought only knew how to scrub floors? They built a ladder. And I'm not the only one climbing." When I finished, the room stood. Not because I was special. But because I was proof. Proof that survival can bloom into triumph. That forgotten women can become unforgettable. I sit now in my garden, surrounded by lavender and lemongrass. My memoir is published. My voice echoes in women's shelters, classrooms, podcasts. I still make café de olla the way my mother did, with cinnamon and brown sugar and prayers. Sometimes, I dream of Veracruz. The kitchen floor. My mother's cracked hands. She would be proud. Not just because I endured. But because I turned pain into purpose. Because I became the woman I needed. Because I remembered myself. They used to call me the woman they forgot. Now, they remember. And so do I. But the story doesn't stop here. With the stability I had fought decades to earn, I found myself hungry again, but not for survival. I was hungry to give. To reach. To become a hand stretched backward for the ones behind me. At 68, I opened Casa Reyes, the root house. A sanctuary, not just a shelter. We offered child care, English classes, therapy in Spanish, and most importantly, storytelling circles for women. Women who had never been asked to speak, never believed their stories mattered. I sat in circles with women from Guatemala, El Salvador, Haiti, Honduras, and across Mexico. I listened as they cried, as they told of oceans crossed, of children left behind, of husbands lost to ICE, to gangs, to deserts. And I told them my story. In full. Not just the pain, but the fire. One of them, Leticia, said, "You gave me permission to remember." We published their stories in a book called Los que se levantan, The Ones Who Rise. We donated all profits to undocumented women in need. When a young filmmaker from UCLA heard about us, she asked to make a documentary. I agreed, but only if the women were paid, and if I had editing rights. "Maria," she said, "you're a badass." I laughed. I never thought I'd hear that word attached to my name. But maybe it fit. At 73, I marched in Washington with a sign that read, "Abuelas Against Fear." Elena held my hand. Luna carried my oxygen tank. I had lived long enough to see Mateo become a school principal. Rosa, a chef. Rafael opened a landscaping business. Elena, a writer. Luna, a social worker. They stood beside me when I won the City Humanitarian Award. When I shook the mayor's hand, he asked if I ever thought this would be my life. I looked into the crowd and said, "I didn't think I'd live this long." And the room laughed. But I meant it. I had known hunger that gnawed bone. Had known nights when hope felt like an enemy. And now, I stood tall, in red, in joy, in power. At 80, I buried my feet in the soil of Veracruz once more. I visited the kitchen floor where I was born. It was cracked, dusty, filled with silence. But this time, I stood over it, not as a child, but as a woman the world had once tried to erase. I kissed the ground. And I whispered, "We made it, Mama." They used to call me the woman they forgot. But I became the woman who will never be forgotten. Not by my children. Not by the women I lifted. Not by the world. And not by myself. Because I, Maria Alvarez, am not a victim of my past. I am the architect of my future. And I am still building. Now, when I walk into Casa Reyes, I see my mother's hands in every woman who walks through the door. Call it a shelter, call it a revolution, we are rewriting what it means to be forgotten. And if this story moves you, don't just remember me. Remember the millions like me. Then ask yourself, whose invisibility have you accepted? And what will you do to end it?